As the resources of each continent dwindled and the environment deteriorated, the world turned its eyes toward Antarctica. Two suddenly rising South American powers gained a foothold in global politics, similar to their standing on the football field, effectively rendering the Antarctic Treaty a mere piece of paper. Yet, human rationality won in another aspect. The final global process of nuclear disarmament began. And as the world achieved complete denuclearization, the scramble for Antarctica became slightly safer. In the distance, the still hot sections of the cavern walls glowed faintly red in the darkness, resembling the dim light of dawn on the edge of this dark plain. On Shan Huabei's left walked his wife, Zhao Wenjia, and ahead of them was their 8-year-old son, Shen Yuan, bouncing around in his bulky radiation suit. Surrounding them were members of the United Nations inspection team, their helmet-mounted flashlights cutting long beams of light through the darkness. The final destruction of the world's nuclear weapons was carried out in two ways: disassembly and underground nuclear explosions. This was one of China's underground explosion disposal sites. The inspection team leader, Kevin Sky, hurried up from behind, his headlamp casting the trio's shadows long across the cavern floor. "Dr. Shun, why did you bring your whole family here? This isn't exactly a picnic spot." Shen Huabei stopped, waiting for the Russian physicist to catch up. "My wife is a geological engineer at the Disposal Command Center, and as for my son, I thought he'd enjoy a place like this. Our son is always fascinated by the strange and the extreme," Zhao Wenjia said to her husband. Through her radiation mask, Shen Huabei saw the worried expression on her face. The boy ahead was jumping and gesturing excitedly. This hole was no bigger than a vegetable cellar when it started, and now it's this huge after just 2 blasts. Imagine, the fireball of an atomic bomb is like a baby buried underground, crying, screaming, kicking. It's really interesting. Shen Huabei and Zhao Wenjia exchanged glances. He smiled while her face showed even more concern. "There are 8 babies this time," Kevin Sky joked with Shen Yuan before turning to Shen Huabei. "Dr. Shun, that's exactly what I need to talk to you about. This time we destroyed the warheads of 8 JL-class submarine launch missiles, each with a yield of 100,000 tons, arranged in a cubic formation on a platform. Is there a problem?" Before the detonation, I clearly saw something in the middle of the warhead cube, through the monitor, a white sphere. Shen Huabei paused again, looking at Kevin Sky. "Doctor, the disposal treaty does specify a minimum amount of material to be placed underground, but it doesn't prohibit adding a little something extra. Since the explosion yield was verified using 5 different observation methods, everything else should be inconsequential." Kevin Sky nodded. "That's why I'm only bringing this up now, out of curiosity. I think you've heard of Candy Shek, haven't you?" Shen Huabei's words froze the entire cavern. Everyone stopped moving, and the beams of light from their helmets ceased to flicker. Because their conversation was conducted via the helmet's radio system, even those far away could hear Shen Huabei's words clearly. After a brief stillness, the inspection team members, nuclear weapon experts from various countries, gathered around. "Is that thing real?" an American asked, staring at Shen Huabei, who nodded. According to legend, when China completed its first nuclear test in the mid-20th century, the first question was that a nuclear explosion? This question, intentionally or not, was insightful. The key to fission bombs lies in implosive compression. When detonated, the fissile material is compressed into a dense sphere by the explosive force of the conventional explosives surrounding it, reaching critical density and triggering a violent chain reaction. This must happen within a millionth of a second. Even the slightest imbalance in the implosive pressure can blow the fissile material apart before it reaches critical density, resulting in nothing more than a conventional explosion. Since the advent of nuclear weapons, researchers have developed various shapes of compressive explosives using complex mathematical models, and recently, they have been experimenting with the latest technologies to achieve precise implosive compression. Candy Shek is one such conceptual technology. Candy Shek is a nanomaterial that wraps around the nuclear explosive when manufacturing a fission bomb, with another layer of conventional explosives on top. The Candy Shek can automatically balance and distribute surrounding stress, ensuring precise implosive compression of the nuclear explosive, even if the external stress from the explosive is uneven. Shen Huabei explained. What you saw, the white sphere surrounded by 8 warheads, was an alloy wrapped in candy sheck. It's subjected to tremendous implosive pressure during the nuclear blast. This is a research experiment conducted during the disposal process. It's a rare opportunity. Once all nuclear weapons are gone, it will be nearly impossible to generate such immense instantaneous pressure on Earth for a long time. What happens to materials under such extreme pressure will be interesting, and we hope this research will lead to a bright future for candy sheck technology in civilian applications. A UN official remarked, "You should have wrapped graphite in the candy sheck. Each explosion could yield a big diamond, making this costly disposal process profitable." Laughter echoed in their headphones. Officials without technical backgrounds were often met with scorn in such settings. The pressure from an 800,000-ton nuclear explosion exceeds what's needed to turn graphite into diamonds by several orders of magnitude, someone said. Shin Yuan's clear voice suddenly chimed in. Of course, it's not diamonds. I'll tell you what it is. A black hole. A tiny black hole. It'll jerk us all in. Jerk the whole Earth in. Through it, we'll enter a more beautiful universe. Ha, kid. The explosion pressure is way too small for that. Dr. Shin, your son's imagination is truly extraordinary. Kevin Sky chuckled. So, what's the result? What did that alloy turn into? I bet you couldn't even find it. I don't know yet. Let's go and see. Shun Huabei pointed ahead. The explosion had shaped this cavern into a perfect sphere, turning the floor into a shallow basin. In the center of this basin, a few headlamps flickered. Those are the Candy Sheck experiment team members. They walked toward the center, feeling like they were descending a long slope. Suddenly, Kevin Sky stopped, crouched down, and placed his hands on the ground. There's a vibration underground. Others felt it too. Could it be an earthquake triggered by the nuclear explosion? Zhao Wenjia shook her head. The geological structure of the disposal site was meticulously surveyed. It can't induce an earthquake. This vibration started after the explosion and has continued ever since. Dr. Deng Yiwen said it's related to the Candy Sheck experiment, but I don't know the details. As they neared the basin's center, the vibration from deep within the earth intensified, tingling their feet, as if a massive, rough wheel were spinning wildly beneath them. When they arrived, a man among the group stood up. He was Deng Yiwen, head of the Material Compression Experiment Project. What's that in your hand? Shin Huabei pointed at a large white object Deng was holding. Fishing line, Dr. Deng said. Parting, the group crouched in a circle around a small hole in the solidified rock floor, about 10 centimeters wide and perfectly round, with smooth edges like a drill hole. The fishing line in Deng's hand extended continuously into the hole. It's already over 10,000 meters deep, with no end in sight. Radar indicates the hole is over 30,000 meters deep and still extending. How did this happen? Someone asked. The compressed alloy drilled its way out. It sank into the earth like a stone sinking in the sea. The vibration you feel is from it passing through the dense strata. Oh my God, this is a miracle, Kevin Sky exclaimed. I thought that alloy would just be vaporized by the blast heat. Deng Yiwen said, without the Candy Sheck, that would have been the case. But this time, before it could be vaporized, it was compressed into a new material state under the implosive pressure. We might call it super solid, though physics already has that term. Let's call it new solid instead. You mean it's sinking into the solid rock like a stone in water? It's even denser. A stone sinks in water not just because of density, but because water is a liquid. Ice has nearly the same density as water, yet a stone won't sink into it. The fact that the new solid is sinking into solid rock shows how extraordinary its density must be. You're saying it's turned into neutron star material? Deng Yiwen shook his head. We haven't measured it precisely yet, but its density is definitely much lower than that of degenerate neutron star matter, as indicated by its slower sinking rate. If it were neutron star material, it would sink into the strata as fast as a meteorite plunges into the atmosphere, triggering volcanic eruptions and massive earthquakes. It's a state between ordinary solid and degenerate matter. Will it keep sinking to the Earth's core? Shun Yuan asked. It might, because once it reaches a certain depth, the strata will turn into liquid, making its descent even easier. That's so fun, Shin Yuan exclaimed. While everyone's attention was on the hole, Shun Huabei, Zhao Wenjia, and their son quietly stepped away, moving into the darkness. Aside from the vibrations beneath their feet, it was silent here. The beams from their headlamps didn't reach far, dissolving into the darkness as if they were three abstract entities adrift in boundless space. Switching their communication to a private channel, they faced a life-altering decision. Shen Yuan had to choose stay with his mother or join his father in suspended animation. Shen Yuan's parents were facing a situation worse than divorce. Shun Huabei was in the late stages of leukemia. He didn't know if his illness was related to his nuclear research, but he was sure he wouldn't live another 6 months. Fortunately, human hibernation technology had matured, and he would sleep, waiting for a cure. Shen Yuan could join him, waking up together someday, or stay with his mother and continue life as it was. The latter was clearly the sensible choice, but the boy leaned toward going to the future with his father, and now his parents were trying once more to persuade him. "Mom, I'll stay with you. I'm not going to sleep with Dad," Shen Yuan said. "You changed your mind?" Zhao Wenjia asked, surprised. "Yes, I think the present is fun enough. Like that thing sinking to the Earth's core, so much fun." "Are you sure?" Shen Huabei asked, while Zhao Wenjia shot him a look, worried the child might change his mind again. "Of course. I want to see that hole again," Shen Yuan said, running back towards the group of headlamps at the basin's center. Watching their son, Zhao Wenjia sighed. "I don't know if I can raise him right. He's too much like you, always living in his dreams. Maybe the future would have suited him better." Shen Huabei put his hands on her shoulders. "No one knows what the future holds. Besides, there's nothing wrong with being a dreamer. The world needs them too. Living in dreams isn't scary. It's why I fell in love with you. But haven't you noticed the other side of him? He's somehow managed to be class president in 2 classes at school. That's news to me. I don't know how he pulled that off. His ambition is sharp, like a knife, and he has the means and skills to achieve it. That's not like you at all." "Yeah, how can those 2 personalities even exist together? I'm more worried about what this fusion will become." By then, their son had rejoined the group, and they turned off their headlamps, letting the darkness envelop them completely. "No matter what, life goes on," Shun Huabei said. "The cure I'm waiting for might come next year, or in a century, or never. You'll have no problem living another 40 years, but promise me this. If 40 years pass and the cure hasn't been found, wake me up once. I want to see you and our son again. Don't let this be a final goodbye." In the darkness, Zhao Wenjia let out a sorrowful laugh. "Meeting an old wife and a son 10 years older than you? But like you said, life goes on." They spent their last moments together in the vast cavern formed by the nuclear blast. Tomorrow, Shun Huabei would enter his dreamless sleep, while Zhao Wenjia and their dream-bound son would continue down life's uncertain path, moving toward an unknown future. It took him a whole day to really wake up. When he first became conscious, the world was just a ball of white fog in his eyes. 10 hours later, some vague shadows appeared in the white fog, also white. 10 hours later, he recognized those shadows as doctors and nurses. People in hibernation have no sense of time at all, so Shun Huabei definitely thought that his hibernation time was only this vague day. He believed that the hibernation maintenance system had malfunctioned just after he lost consciousness. After his vision recovered further, he looked around the ward. The walls were very ordinary white, and the lights installed on the side walls emitted a soft light. The shape looked very familiar, which seemed to confirm his feeling. But then he knew he was wrong. The white ceiling of the ward suddenly emitted a bright blue light, and eye-catching white words appeared. "Hecko! The Earth Life Refrigeration Company that undertook your hibernation service went bankrupt in 2089. Your hibernation service has been transferred to Green Cloud Company. Your current hibernation number is WS3. Your hibernation time is 74 years, 5 months, 7 days, and 13 hours, and there is no overspending on prepaid fees. It is April 16th, 2125, and welcome to our era." It took another 3 hours for him to gradually regain his hearing and be able to speak. After 74 years of sleep, his first words were, "Where are my wife and son?" The tall female doctor standing by the bed handed him a folded white paper. "Mr. Shun, this is a letter from your wife." At that time, few of us used paper to write letters. Xinhuabei didn't say this, but just looked at the doctor with a strange look. But when he unfolded the paper with his still numb hands, he got the second evidence of his time travel. The paper was blank, and then it emitted a blue light, and the handwriting appeared from top to bottom, quickly covering the entire paper. Before he went into hibernation, he had imagined countless times what his wife would say to him when she woke up, but the content of this letter was beyond his most bizarre imagination. Dear, you are in danger. When you see this letter, I will no longer be alive. The person writing this letter to you is Dr. Gua. She is someone you can trust, perhaps the only person you can trust in the world. Follow her arrangements. Please forgive me for breaking my promise and not reviving you after 40 years. Our Yuaner has become a person you cannot imagine. He has done things you cannot imagine. As his mother, I don't know how to face you. I am heartbroken. The past life is meaningless to me. Take care of yourself. Where is my son? Where is Shan Yuan? Xinhuabei asked with difficulty. He died 5 years ago. The doctor's answer was extremely cold, not caring at all about the pain this news brought to the father, but she seemed to be somewhat aware of this and comforted her by saying, your son also lived to be 78 years old. Dr. Gua took out a card and handed it to Xinhuabei. This is your new ID card. The information stored in it is all in the letter just now. Xinhuabei turned the paper over and over. There was nothing on it except Zhao Wenjia's brief letter. When he turned the paper, the wrinkled part would emit water like ripples, much like the phenomenon that occurred when pressing the LCD display of his time with a finger. Dr. Gua reached out and took the paper, pressed the lower right corner, and the display on the paper turned over a page, and a table appeared. I'm sorry, but paper no longer exists in the true sense of the word. Xinhuabei looked up at her in confusion. Because the forest no longer exists. She shrugged and pointed to the items on the form one by one. Your current name is Wang Ruo, born in 2097, your parents are dead, and you don't have any relatives. You were born in Hohot, but now you live here. This is a very remote mountain village in Ningxia, the most ideal place I can find, which will not attract attention. But you need plastic surgery before you go there. Don't talk about your son with anyone, let alone show interest in him. But I was born in Beijing, and I'm Shan Yuan's father. Dr. Gua stood up and said coldly, if you go out and announce it like this, then your hibernation and the treatment you just completed will be meaningless. You won't live for more than an hour. What on earth just happened? The doctor smiled and said, you are probably the only one in the world who doesn't know. Okay, hurry up and get out of bed and practice walking. We need to leave here as soon as possible. Xinhuabei wanted to ask something, but suddenly there was a deafening knock on the door. After the door was knocked open, 6 or 7 people rushed in and surrounded his bed. These people were of different ages and dressed differently. What they had in common was that they all had a strange hat, either worn on their heads or held in their hands. This hat had a round brim that was shoulder-width wide, much like the straw hats worn by farmers in the past. Another thing they had in common was that they all wore a transparent mask, and some of them had already pulled it off their mouths after entering the room. These people stared at Xinhuabei with gloomy faces. Is this Shan Yuan's father? The man who asked the question looked the oldest among the group, with a long white beard, and seemed to be in his 80s. Without waiting for the doctor to answer, he nodded to the people around him and said, he looks very much like his son. Doctor, you have fulfilled your responsibility to this patient, and now he belongs to us. How did you know he was here? Dr. Gua asked calmly. Without waiting for the old man to answer, a nurse in the corner of the ward said, I told them. You betrayed your patient? Dr. Gua turned around and stared at her angrily. I'm glad to do it, said the nurse, her pretty face twisted into a grin. A young man grabbed Xinhuabei by his clothes and dragged him off the bed. He collapsed to the ground due to the weakness brought by hibernation. A girl kicked him in the lower abdomen. The pointed toe of her shoe almost pierced his stomach. The severe pain made him curl up on the floor like a shrimp. The old man grabbed his collar with his strong hands and lifted him up, trying to make him stand like a bamboo pole. When he saw that it was not working, he let go and he fell on his back again. The back of his head hit the floor and he saw stars in front of his eyes. He heard someone say, "It's great. That jerk can finally repay part of what he owes to society." Who are you? Xinhuabei asked weakly. He looked up at them from between their feet, as if he was looking at a group of ferocious giants. "You should at least know me," the old man sneered. Looking up from below, his face was very strange, which frightened Shen Huabei. "I am Deng Yuan's son, Deng Yang." This familiar name made Shen Huabei's heart move. He turned over and grabbed the old man's trouser leg, shouting excitedly, "Your father and I were colleagues and best friends, and you and my son were classmates. Don't you remember? Oh my God, you were Yang? I can't believe that you were. Take your dirty claws off." Deng Yang yelled. The man who dragged him out of bed squatted down, put his fierce face close to Shen Huabei and said, "Listen, kid, the years of hibernation do not count as age. He is your elder now. You have to show respect for your elders. If Xin Yuan were alive today, he would be your father," Deng Yang said loudly, causing a burst of laughter. Then he pointed at the people around him and introduced them to him one by one. When this boy was 4 years old, his parents died in the Central Fracture disaster. This girl's parents also died in the Bolt Loss disaster when she was less than 2 years old. These people, when they learned that their life's investment had gone to waste, some attempted suicide and some suffered from schizophrenia. As for me, I was deceived by that jerk and threw my youth and talent into that darn project, and now all I get is the world's curse. Shen Huabei, lying on the floor, shook his head in confusion, indicating that he didn't understand. "You are facing a court composed of victims of the Antarctic Yard Project. Although every citizen of this country is a victim, we want to enjoy the pleasure of this punishment alone. The real court is of course not so simple. In fact, it is much more complicated than your time. So we will not send you there and let them and those lawyers talk nonsense for a year and then declare you innocent, just like they did to your son. In an hour, we will let you get a real trial, and when this trial is carried out, you will find out how lucky it was if you died of leukemia more than 70 years ago." The people around laughed grimly again. Then 2 people lifted up Shen Huabei's arms and dragged him out the door. His legs dragged weakly on the floor, and he didn't even have the strength to struggle. "Mr. Shen, I have tried my best," Dr. Gua said behind him before he was dragged out of the door. He wanted to look back at her, the only person his wife said he could trust in this cruel era, but the posture of being dragged made him unable to look back. He only heard her say again, "Actually, you don't have to be too depressed. Living in this era is not an easy thing." When he was dragged out of the door, he heard the doctor shouting, "Close the door quickly and turn up the air purifier. Are you going to choke us to death?" From her tone, it was obvious that she no longer cared about his fate. After he left the hospital, he finally understood what the doctor meant by the last sentence. There was a pungent smell in the air that made it hard to breathe. He was dragged through the hospital corridor, and after he left the door, the 2 men stopped dragging him and put his arm on their shoulders to carry him. After he came out, he took a deep breath of relief, but the air he inhaled was not the fresh air he had imagined, but a gas that was more polluted and choking than that in the hospital building. His lungs were burning, and he broke out into a continuous and violent cough. Just when he was about to suffocate from coughing, he heard someone next to him say, "Put on a breathing mask for him, otherwise he will die before the execution." Then someone covered his mouth and nose with something. Although it was just a strange smell that replaced the previous choking smell, he could at least breathe smoothly. He also heard someone say, "There is no need to give him a protective cap. Anyway, during the time he can live, ultraviolet rays and other things will not cause a second leukemia." This remark caused another round of strange laughter from others. When he took a breath and his eyes, which were tearing due to suffocation, became clear, he raised his head and looked at the future world for the first time. He first saw the pedestrians on the street. They were all wearing transparent masks called breathing membranes and large straw hats called protective caps. He also noticed that although the weather was hot, people were dressed very tightly and no one exposed their skin. Then he saw the surrounding environment. It seemed to be in a deep canyon. The canyon was made up of skyscrapers that towered into the clouds. It was no exaggeration to say that they towered into the clouds. These tall buildings all stretched into the gray clouds in the air. In the narrow sky, he saw the sun appearing behind the gray clouds in a blurry halo. The halo moved black smoke patterns. He realized that it was not clouds but smoke that covered the sky. It's a great era, isn't it? Ding Yang said, and his accomplices burst into laughter again, as if they hadn't been so happy for a long time. He was carried to a car not far away. The shape of the car had changed a little, but he was sure it was a car. It was the same size as the small passenger car in the past and could accommodate these people. Then two people passed them and walked in another direction. They were wearing helmets and their clothes were very different from the past, but Shun Huabei recognized their identities at a glance and shouted at them, "Help! I'm kidnapped! Help!" The two policemen turned around suddenly, ran over to look at Shen Huabei, looked at his hospital gown, and then looked at his bare feet. One of them asked, "Are you a hibernator who just woke up?" Shun Huabei nodded weakly. "They kidnapped me." Another policeman nodded and said, "Sir, this kind of thing happens all the time. There are a lot of hibernators awakening during this period, and a lot of social security resources are used to accommodate you. As a result, you are often hated and attacked." "It doesn't seem to be the case," Shen Huabei said, but the policeman waved his hand to interrupt him. "Sir, you are safe now." Then the policeman turned to Deng Yang and his group. "This gentleman obviously needs further treatment. Two of you will take him back to the hospital, and this officer will go with you to find out the situation. I also want to inform you that the 7 of you have been arrested for kidnapping." As he said that, he raised his wrist and called for support from the intercom above. Deng Yang rushed over to stop him. "Wait a minute, officer. We are not the thugs who persecuted the hibernators. Look at this man. Doesn't he look familiar?" The two policemen stared at Shun Huabei carefully and briefly removed his breathing mask to better identify him. It seems to be Mississippi. It's not me, Cici. He is Shun Yuan's father." The two policemen stared back and forth between Deng Yang and Shun Huabei with wide eyes, as if they had seen a ghost. The orphans left behind by the Central Fault disaster pulled them aside and whispered to each other. During this process, the two policemen raised their heads and looked at Shen Huabei from time to time. Each time their eyes changed, and in the last look they cast towards this side, Shun Huabei despairingly read that these people were accomplices of Deng Yang's gang. Two policemen came over without even glancing at Shen Huabei. One of them looked around vigilantly as if on sentry duty, while the other walked straight up to Deng Yang and said in a low voice, "Let's just pretend we didn't see him. We must not let the public notice him, otherwise there will be a riot." What frightened Shen Huabei was not only the content of the police's words, but also the way he said it. He obviously didn't care about Shun Huabei hearing these words, as if he was just an inanimate object placed next to him. The men stuffed Shun Huabei into the car, and they all got in. As the car started, the glass of the windows became opaque. The car was self-driving, there was no driver, and there was no manual control lever in front. No one in the car spoke along the way. Just to break the suffocating silence, Shun Huabei casually asked, "Who is Mississippi?" "A movie star," said the orphan girl left behind by the boat-loss disaster who was sitting next to him, "famous for playing your son." Shin Yuan and the alien Satan are the two most common villains in film and television media at present. Shun Huabei moved his body uneasily and opened a gap between them. At this moment, his arm accidentally touched a button under the car window, and the window glass immediately became transparent. He looked out and found that the car was driving on a huge and complex circular overpass. The bridge was crowded with cars, and the distance between cars was less than 2 meters. The terrifying thing about this scene was that it was not a traffic jam at this time. In this distance that only existed in a traffic jam, all the cars were driving at high speed, and the speed may exceed 100 kilometers per hour. This made the entire overpass look like a crazy turntable made of cars. The car they were in was rushing to a fork in the road at a dizzying speed. When the car was about to crash into another traffic flow, there was a gap in the traffic flow to meet it. This gap kept appearing at the fork in the road at an imperceptible speed, making the two turbulent traffic flows merge seamlessly. Shun Huabei had long noticed that the car was self-driving, and artificial intelligence had maximized the utilization of the road. Someone behind reached out and dimmed the glass again. "Do you really want to kill me when I know nothing about this?" Shun Huabei asked. Deng Yang, who was sitting in the front row, looked back at him and said lazily, "Then I'll tell you briefly. People with rich imaginations are often powerless in reality. On the contrary, those strong people in reality who control the direction of history mostly have a brain with poor imagination. And your son is one of the few people in history who can combine the two into one. Most of the time, reality is just a small island in his ocean of fantasy, but if he wants, he can turn his world upside down at any time, making fantasy an island and reality an ocean. He is the best sailor in these two oceans. I know, my son. You don't have to waste time on this. Shen Huabei interrupted Deng Yang and said, but you would never have imagined how high Shen Yuan has climbed to in reality and how much power he possesses, which enables him to turn his most perverted fantasies into reality. Unfortunately, society did not discover this danger early. Perhaps there have been people like him in history, but like asteroids that brushed past the Earth, they disappeared into the vast space without being able to release their energy in this world. Unfortunately, history has given your son the opportunity to create disasters with his perverted fantasies. In the 5th year after you went into hibernation, the world's competition for the Antarctic continent had a preliminary result. This continent was identified as an area for global common development, but each major country won a large exclusive economic zone for itself. Making their own economic zone in Antarctica prosperous as soon as possible and developing the resources there as soon as possible is the only hope for major countries to get rid of the economic recession caused by environmental problems and resource depletion. The future is on top of the earth became a well-known slogan at the time. It was at this time that your son put forward that crazy idea, claiming that the realization of this idea would turn Antarctica into the country's courtyard. By then, it would be more convenient to go to Antarctica from Beijing than from Beijing to Tianjin. This is not a metaphor, it is true. The travel time is shorter than that to Tianjin, and the energy consumed and the pollution caused are less than those to Tianjin. When the famous TV speech began, the audience across the country laughed as if they were watching a farce, but they soon quieted down because they found that this idea really works. This is the Antarctic Courtyard concept, and later the disastrous Antarctic Courtyard project was started based on it. Having said this, Deng Yang fell silent for unknown reasons. Go on, what is the concept of the Antarctic Courtyard? Shen Huabei urged. You will know, Deng Yang said coldly. Then could you at least tell me what I have to do with all this? Because you are Shen Yuan's father? Isn't this simple? Is the theory of bloodline popular again now? Of course not, but your son's numerous confessions make the bloodline theory suitable for you. When he became world famous, he sincerely claimed that most of his thoughts and personality were formed by his father before the age of 8, and that the following years were just some supplementary knowledge details. He also stated that the original creator of the Antarctic Courtyard idea was also his father. What? Me? Antarctic Courtyard? This is simply. And hear me out on one final point. You also provided the technical basis for the Antarctic Yard project. What do you mean? Of course, it is the new solid-state material. Without it, the Antarctic Courtyard concept is just a dream. With it, this perverted fantasy immediately becomes a reality. Shen Huabei shook his head in confusion. He really couldn't imagine how the new ultra-high-density solid material could turn the Antarctic continent into the courtyard of this country. The car stopped at this time. After getting off the bus, Shen Huabei saw a strange hill in front of him. The hill was a single rust color, and there was no grass on it. Deng Yang tilted his head towards the hill and said, "This is an iron mountain." Seeing Shen Huabei's surprised look, he added, "It's just a big piece of iron." Shen Huabei looked around and found that there were several such iron mountains nearby. They stood abruptly on this vast plain with strange colors, giving this place an exotic scenery. Shen Huabei had recovered enough to walk, and he followed the group towards a tall building in the distance. The building was a perfect cylinder, hundreds of meters high, with a smooth surface and no openings. When they got closer, they saw a heavy iron door rumble and slide to the side, revealing an entrance. The group walked in, and the door closed tightly behind them. Under the dim light, Shen Huabei saw that they were in a place that looked like a sealed cabin. On the smooth white wall hung a long row of sealed suits that looked like space suits. People took down a set of sealed suits from the wall and put them on. With the help of 2 people, he also began to put on one of them. During this process, he looked around and saw that there was another tightly closed sealed door opposite. There was a red light on the door. There was a glowing digital display next to the red light. He saw that it was the atmospheric pressure value. When his heavy helmet was tightened, a transparent liquid crystal display area appeared in the upper right corner of the mask, showing rapidly changing numbers and graphics. He could only see that it was the self-test status of each system inside the sealed suit. Then, he heard a low humming sound outside, as if some equipment was started, and then noticed that the atmospheric pressure value displayed above the door opposite was rapidly decreasing. After about 3 minutes, it was reduced to 0. The red light next to it turned green, and the door opened, revealing the dark interior of the sealed building. Shen Huabei confirmed his guess. This is a transition cabin from the atmospheric area to the vacuum area. In this way, the interior of this huge cylinder is a vacuum. The group walked into the entrance, and the door closed behind them. They were in thick darkness. Some people's sealed helmets had lights on, and several beams of light appeared in the darkness, but they could not illuminate very far. A familiar feeling appeared, and Shen Huabei shuddered, with an inexplicable fear in his heart. "Go forward." Deng Yang's voice rang out in his earphones. The halo of the headlamp illuminated a small bridge in front of him. It was less than 1 meter wide, and the other end stretched into the darkness, so it was hard to tell how long it was. It was pitch black under the bridge. Shen Huabei walked onto the bridge with trembling legs. The heavy boots of the airtight suit made a hollow sound when they stepped on the thin iron bridge surface. He walked a few meters and turned back to see if the people behind him had caught up. At this time, everyone's headlamps went out at the same time, and the darkness swallowed everything. But this only lasted for a few seconds, and suddenly a blue light appeared under the bridge. Shen Huabei looked back and saw that he was the only one on the bridge. The others were crowded at the edge of the bridge and looking at him. In the blue light shining from below, they were like a group of ghosts. He held the railing on the side of the bridge and looked down. The fear that almost made his blood coagulate seized him. He was standing over a deep well. The diameter of the well was about 10 meters, and there was a ring of light at intervals on the well wall, marking the existence of the deep well in the darkness. He was standing in the middle of the small bridge across the well mouth. From here, the well was bottomless, and the countless light circles on the well wall gradually shrank until they became a point. He seemed to be looking down at a large target emitting blue light. "The trial will begin now. Go and pay back everything your son owes," Deng Yang said loudly, then turned a wheel and stalled at the bridge head with his hand, muttering to himself, "For my abused youth and talent." The small bridge tilted at an angle, and Shen Huabei grabbed the railing on the other side and tried to keep himself steady. Then Deng Yang gave the wheel to the orphan left behind by the central fault disaster, who also turned it hard. "For my melted parents." The angle of the bridge's tilt increased a little more. The wheel was passed to the orphan girl left behind by the bolt disaster. The girl glared at Shen Huabei and turned the wheel hard. "For my evaporated parents." The man who attempted suicide because of losing all his wealth snatched the wheel from the orphan girl left behind by the bolt disaster. "For my money, my Rolls-Royce and Lincoln, my beach house and swimming pool, for my ruined life, and my wife and children who were queuing for relief on the cold streets." The bridge had turned 90 degrees, and Shen Huabei could only sit on the lower railing by holding the upper railing with his hands. The man who had lost all his wealth and suffered from schizophrenia also came over to spin the wheel with the man who had attempted suicide because of losing all his wealth. He was obviously not fully recovered from his illness. He said nothing, but just smiled at the deep well below. The small bridge completely overturned, and Shen Huabei was hanging upside down above the deep well, holding the railing with both hands. At this time, he was not very afraid. Looking at the bottomless gate of heck under his feet, his short life flashed through his mind like lightning. His childhood and youth were gray, and he could not remember much happiness and joy in those times. After entering society, he achieved academic success and invented the sugar-coating technology, but this did not make life accept him. He struggled in the spider web of interpersonal relationships, but was entangled more and more tightly. He had never really experienced love, and marriage was only a last resort. When he made up his mind never to have children, the child came into the world. He was a person living in his own thoughts and dreams, an alternative that most people hated and could never really integrate into the crowd. His life was always isolated, and always sailing against the current. He had placed his hopes on the future, but this was the future. His deceased wife, his son who had become the public enemy of mankind, the polluted city, these hateful and perverted people. All this had made him discouraged about this era and his own life. He had originally made up his mind to know the truth before he died, but now it didn't matter. He was a very tired traveler, and the only thing he longed for was liberation. Amid the cheers of the people near the well, Shen Huabei loosened his hands and fell towards the target of fate that was glowing blue. He closed his eyes and immersed himself in the weightlessness of falling. His body seemed to become transparent, and all the weight that life could not bear had left him. In the last few seconds of his life, a song suddenly sounded in his mind. It was an old Soviet song taught by his father. No one could sing it before he hibernated. Later, he went to Moscow as a visiting scholar, hoping to find a soulmate there, but the song was also lost in Russia, so it became his own song. Before reaching the bottom of the well, he could only sing 1 or 2 notes in his heart, but he believed that when his soul finally left his body, the song would continue in another world. Unconsciously, this slow melody song had been sung halfway in his heart. A long time had passed, and then his consciousness suddenly woke up. He opened his eyes and saw himself constantly and quickly passing through one blue halo after another. The fall continues. Ha ha ha. Deng Yang's wild laughter rang out in his headphones. It feels pretty good to be dying, right? He looked down and saw a series of concentric circles emitting blue light coming towards him. He kept passing through the largest circle, and new small circles kept appearing at the center of the circle and quickly expanded. Looking up, there was also a concentric circle, but its movement was the inversion of the previous scene. How deep is the well? He asked. Don't worry, you will eventually reach the bottom. The bottom of the well is a hard and smooth steel plate. With a bang, the meat patty you turn into will be thinner than paper. Ha ha ha. At this time, he noticed that the LCD display area in the upper right corner of the mask reappeared, with a line of red glowing words. You have now reached a depth of 100 kilometers, a speed of 1.4 kilometers per second, and you have passed through the Moho discontinuity. From the crust into the mantle. Shen Huabei closed his eyes again. This time there was no more singing in his mind. Instead, he was thinking quickly like a calm computer. When he opened his eyes again half a minute later, he understood everything. This was the Antarctic Courtyard Project. The hard and smooth steel plate at the bottom of the well did not exist. This well had no bottom. This is a tunnel that goes through the earth. Does it go along a tangent or through the center of the earth? Shen Huabei asked, his thoughts just popping up in the form of language. What a smart mind. It came up with this idea so quickly. Deng Yang exclaimed. Looks a lot like his son. Someone followed up, saying that it sounded like he might be an orphan left behind by the Central Fault disaster. It goes through the center of the earth, from Mohin, China, across the earth to the Antarctic Peninsula, the easternmost tip of the Antarctic continent. Deng Yang replied to Shen Huabei. That city just now was Mo? Yes, it thrives as the starting point of the Earth Tunnel. From what I understand, the tunnel through the Earth from there should reach southern Argentina. Yes, but the tunnel has a slight curve. Since the tunnel is curved, will I hit the wall? If the tunnel went straight to Argentina, you would definitely hit it. That kind of straight tunnel on the Earth can only be realized on the Earth's axis running through the 2 poles. This tunnel at a certain angle to the Earth's axis must take into account the rotation of the Earth. Its curvature allows you to pass smoothly. Oh, what a great project! Shen Huabei exclaimed sincerely. You have now reached a depth of 300.p.t. With a velocity of 2.4 ai/section, you have entered the viscous material region of the mantle. He saw that the frequency with which he passed through the aperture was increasing, and the density of the 2 concentric circles below and above had increased a lot. Deng Yang said, the idea of building a tunnel through the earth is not new. 2 people proposed this idea in the 18th century. One was a mathematician named Maupertuis, and the other was the world-famous Voltaire. Later, French astronomer Flammarion brought up this plan again and first considered the factor of the Earth's rotation. Shen Huabei interrupted him and asked, then how can you say that this idea came from me? Because those people before were just conducting thought experiments, but your idea influenced a person, who later used his devilish talent to realize this crazy idea. But I don't remember mentioning this to Shen Yuan. What a forgetful person you are. You made a hypothesis that later changed the course of human history, but you forgot it. I really can't remember. Then you can always remember the Argentine named Bergadou and the birthday gift he gave to your son? You have now reached a depth of 1,500 kilometers with a speed of 1 kilometers per second and have entered the rigid material zone of the mantle. Shen Huabei finally remembered. It was Shen Yuan's 6th birthday, and Shen Huabei invited Dr. Bergadou, an Argentine physicist in Beijing, to his home. At that time, the two South American powers had risen. Argentina claimed a large area of land in Antarctica and sent a large number of immigrants to Antarctica. At the same time, it rapidly developed nuclear weapons, which shocked the world. In the subsequent global denuclearization process, Argentina naturally joined the United Nations Destruction Committee as a nuclear weapon state. Shen Huabei and Vegado were both experts in a technical group of this committee. The gift that Bergadou brought to Shen Yuan that time was a globe. It was made of the latest glass material. That glass was a reflection of Argentina's rapidly developing technological level. Its refractive index was the same as that of air, so the existence of the glass ball could not be seen. The continents on the globe seemed to be suspended between the two poles. Shen Yuan liked this gift very much. During the post-dinner chat, Bergadou took out a major Chinese newspaper and showed Shen Huabei a political cartoon on it, which showed an Argentine football star kicking the earth. I don't like this, Begana said. The Chinese seem to know my country only in terms of football and extend this knowledge to international politics. Argentina has become an aggressive country in your eyes. You have to know that Argentina is the country farthest away from China on the earth. You are on the opposite side of the earth. Zhao Wenjia said with a smile, taking the fully transparent globe from Shen Yuan's hand. On it, China and Argentina overlapped with each other through the super-transparent sphere. In fact, I have a way to make the two countries communicate better, Shen Huabei said, taking the globe. All we need to do is dig a tunnel from China through the center of the earth. Bergana said, that tunnel is more than 12,000 kilometers long, not much shorter than the flight path. But the travel time will be much shorter. Imagine you jump in from this end of the tunnel with your travel bag. Shen Huabei's original intention was to divert the topic away from politics, and he succeeded. Begana became interested. Shen, your way of thinking is always different. Let's see. After I jump in, I will continue to accelerate. Although my acceleration will decrease as the depth of the fall increases, I will indeed continue to accelerate to the center of the earth. When I pass the center of the earth, my speed reaches the maximum value and the acceleration is 0. Then I will start to decelerate and ascend. The value of this deceleration will continue to increase as I ascend. When I reach the ground on the other side of the earth in Argentina, my speed is exactly 0. If I want to go back to China, I just need to jump from that side again. If I want, I can make eternal simple harmonic vibrations between the northern and southern hemispheres. Well, it's wonderful, but the travel time. Let's do the math. Shen Huabei turned on the computer. The calculation results came out quickly. With the ideal average density of the Earth, it would take 42 minutes and 12 seconds to jump from China into the Earth tunnel, pass through the Earth with a diameter of more than 12,000 kilometers, and fall into Argentina. Quick trip, said Begana happily. You are now at a depth of 2,800 miles, at a speed of 6.5 kilometers per second, and you are crossing the Gutenberg discontinuity, entering the core. As he was falling, Shen Huabei heard Deng Yang say, that night, you must not have noticed that your son's eyes were wide open and full of spirit, listening to you intently. You also couldn't have known that he had been staring at the transparent globe at the head of the bed and didn't sleep all night. Of course, you may have had this influence on your son countless times. You have planted many seeds of fantasy in Shen Yuan's mind, and this is just one of them that has blossomed. Shen Huabei stared at the rapidly rising well wall about 4 or 5 meters away from him. The high frequency surrounding light made the surface of the well wall a little blurry. Is this a new solid-state material? He asked. What else could it be? What other material would be strong enough to build a tunnel like this? How is such a huge amount of new solid matter produced? How is this material, which is so heavy that it can sink into the earth, transported and processed. I can only briefly explain that the new solid matter is produced through continuous small nuclear explosions. The core technology is of course your sugar coating, and its production line is huge and complex. The new solid material has multiple density levels. The lower density material will not sink into the stratum. Use it to build a large foundation and place the high density material on it. Its pressure is dispersed by the foundation and it can float on the ground. Using a similar principle, this material can also be transported. As for the processing of the new solid material, the technology is more complicated, and you may not be able to understand it with your level of knowledge. In short, the new solid material is already a huge industry, and its economic scale exceeds that of steel. It is not just used in the Antarctic Courtyard project. So how was this tunnel built? First, let me tell you something. The basic building block for a tunnel is a well ring. Each well ring is about 100 meters long, and the entire tunnel is made up of about 240,000 well rings. As for the specific construction process, you're a smart person, so maybe you can figure it out yourself. You have now reached a depth of 4,100 kilometers, a speed of 7.5 kilometers per second, and are in the middle of the liquid core. A sunken well? Yes, it uses the caisson technology. First, the well rings are sunk into the strata from China and Antarctica and spliced into a line that runs through the Earth. The second step is to dig out the stratum material in the spliced well rings, and the tunnel is formed. The iron mountains you see outside the tunnel entrance are made of iron-nickel alloys dug out from the core part of the tunnel. The specific construction is carried out by underground ships. This kind of machine that can travel in the strata is also made of new solid materials. Some models can travel to the depth of the core. They can locate the sunken well ring in the strata. According to this calculation, only 120,000 well circles are needed. Supersolid materials can withstand the pressure and high temperature deep in the earth without any problems, but there are many flowing bodies underground. The shallower part is the flowing magma, and the more dangerous part is the liquid iron-nickel flow in the core. They produce huge shear impact on the tunnel. The strength of the new solid material can withstand this impact, but the connection between the well rings cannot. Therefore, the tunnel is composed of two layers of well rings. The inner well ring is close to the outer well ring, and the two well rings are staggered with each other, so that the tunnel has sufficient shear strength. You have now reached a depth of 5,400 miles, with a speed of 7.7 kilometers per second, and are approaching the solid core of the Earth. Next, I think you're going to tell me about the disaster caused by the Antarctic Yard project. The first disaster of the Antarctic Yard project occurred 25 years ago, when the project entered the final exploration and design stage, which required a large number of underground voyages. During one of the exploration voyages, an underground ship named Sunset 6 crashed in the mantle and sank into the core. 2 of the 3 crew members on board were killed, and only a young female navigator survived. She is still trapped in the core of the Earth and will spend the rest of her life in the cramped underground ship. The neutrino communication equipment on that ship has lost its transmitting function, but it may still be able to receive. By the way, her name is Shun Jing, and she is your granddaughter. Shun Huabei's heart twitched. At this crazy speed, the light circles on the well wall had become one in Shun Huabei's eyes, making the wall of the giant well emit a dazzling blue light. Shun Huabei, who was falling rapidly in it, seemed to be passing through a time tunnel and entering the past that was not far away but that he had never experienced. You have now reached a depth of 5,800 miles, with a speed of 7.8 kilometers per second. You have entered the solid core of the Earth. You are approaching the center of the Earth. In the 6th year of the Antarctic Courtyard project, a tragic central fracture disaster occurred. As mentioned earlier, the tunnel is composed of 2 interlaced well rings. When installing the inner well ring, the JF material in the connected outer well ring must be hollowed out first to prevent impurities from mixing between the 2 well rings and affecting the tightness of their fit. During the construction, a process of hollowing out a section of the outer well ring and inserting an inner well ring was adopted. This means that during the construction of the core section, when a section of the outer well ring is hollowed out and the inner well ring is not in place, the 2 outer well rings, including the joint, will bear the impact of the core iron-nickel flow alone. Originally, the joint between the 2 sections of the well rings used a very strong riveting technology, and in the design, it should be able to withstand the impact of the iron-nickel flow for a considerable period of time. However, more than 490 kilometers into the core, there was an extremely strong iron-nickel flow at the two sections of the well rings that had just been hollowed out, and its flow rate was 5 times the highest value observed in previous large-scale exploration. The strong impact caused the two well rings to dislocation. High temperature and high-pressure core material instantly poured into the tunnel and rose rapidly along the built tunnel. After learning that the fracture had occurred, Shen Yuan, as the chief commander of the project, immediately ordered the closure of the safety gate located at the Gutenberg discontinuity, which was called the Gutenberg Gate. At this time, there were more than 2,500 engineers working in the nearly 500-kilometer tunnel under the gate. After learning that the fracture had occurred, they took the high-speed elevators in the tunnel to evacuate at the same time. There were more than 130 elevators in total, and the last elevator kept a distance of about 30 kilometers from the iron-nickel flow rising along the tunnel. In the end, only 61 elevators had time to pass through the Gutenberg Gate, and the rest were engulfed by the 4,000-degree high-temperature core torrent after the gate was closed, and 1,527 people died in the center of the Earth. The central fault disaster shocked the world, and Shen Yuan was strongly condemned by two parties. One party believed that he could have waited until all the elevators passed through the Gutenberg Gate before closing the gate. At this time, the iron-nickel flow was still 30 kilometers away from the gate. Although the time was short, it was still in time. Even if this gate was not closed in time, there was another safety gate above the Moho discontinuity, the interface between the surface and the mantle, the Moho. The extremely angry families of the victims accused Shen Yuan of intentional homicide. In response, Shen Yuan had only one sentence in front of the media: "I'm afraid of making mistakes. This mistake really cannot be made." In more than one disaster film based on the Antarctic Courtyard project, the most famous one is Iron Spring, in which there is a nightmare scene of core material rushing out of the surface. A column of iron-nickel liquid rushing high up the stratosphere, at that height, spread out into a huge flower of death. The dazzling white light it emitted turned the night of the northern hemisphere into day. The Earth was covered with a torrential rain of scorching molten iron. The Asian continent became a steel-making furnace. Humanity eventually faced the fate of the dinosaurs. This description was not an exaggeration. Because of this, Shen Yuan faced another accusation that was completely opposite to the above. He should have closed the Gutenberg Gate earlier, and there was no need to wait for the 61 elevators to pass. More people supported this accusation, and public opinion accused him of a temporary fabricated crime. Crimes against humanity due to dereliction of duty. Although neither of the two charges was established in the end, Shen Yuan resigned and left the command level of the Antarctic Courtyard project. He refused another appointment and has been working in the tunnel as an ordinary engineer ever since. At this moment, the blue light emitted from the well wall suddenly turned red. You have now reached a depth of 6,300 miles, a speed of 8 kilometers per second, and are passing through the center of the Earth. Deng Yang's voice rang out in the headset. You have now reached a speed that allows you to fly out of the Earth, but you are right at the center of this planet. The Earth is spinning around you, and all the oceans and continents, all the cities and all the people are spinning around you. Bathed in this solemn red light, music sounded in Xian Huabei's mind again. This time it was a magnificent symphony. He passed through the red, glowing geocentric tunnel at the first cosmic speed, as if drifting in the blood vessels of the Earth, which made his blood boil. Deng Yang added, "Although the new solid material has good thermal insulation properties, the temperature around you is still over 1,500 degrees, and the cooling system in your sealed suit is running at full power." The red light on the well wall lasted only more than 10 seconds before turning back into a calm blue light. You have passed the center of the Earth and are now ascending and starting to slow down. You have ascended 500 miles at 7.8 kilometers per second and are still in the solid core. The blue light calmed Shen Huabei down. He had adapted to weightlessness and now slowly turned his body, pointing his head in the direction of travel, to find the feeling of rising. He asked Deng Yang, "It seems there is a third disaster?" The Bolt Loss disaster happened 5 years ago. At that time, the Antarctic Courtyard project had been completed and the Earth Tunnel had been put into formal operation. There were Earth trains running through it every moment. The carriages of the Earth trains were cylinders with a diameter of 8 meters and a length of 50 meters. Each Earth train could consist of up to 200 carriages and could carry 20,000 tons of cargo, or nearly 10,000 passengers. It took 42 minutes to travel through the Earth one way. The transportation process was just free fall and did not consume any energy. At the time, at the most starting station, a maintenance worker accidentally dropped a bolt with a diameter of less than 10 centimeters into the tunnel. The bolt was made of a new material that can absorb electromagnetic waves, so it was not detected by the radar of the safety monitoring system. The bolt continued to fall in the tunnel, passed through the Earth to the South Pole station, and fell back from there. When it reached the center of the Earth, it hit a train that was rising toward the South Pole. The relative speed of the bolt and the train was as high as 16 kilometers per second. Such kinetic energy made it like a bomb. It penetrated the first two carriages and vaporized everything along the way. The explosion of the two carriages caused the entire train to rub against the wall of the shaft at a speed of 8 kilometers per second and was torn to pieces in an instant. A large amount of debris moved back and forth in the tunnel, some of which passed through the entire Earth again and again, while most of them lost some of their speed due to impact and just swung around the core. It took a month to completely clear the debris in the tunnel, and the bodies of the 3,000 passengers on the train were not found, as the high temperature of the core had completely cremated them. You have now risen 2,200 miles from the center of the Earth at a speed of 7.5 meters per second and have re-entered the liquid part of the Earth's core. But the biggest disaster is this mega-project itself. The Antarctic Yard project is an unprecedented feat in human history in terms of technology, and its economic stupidity is unprecedented. Until now, people are still puzzled as to how such a project with almost idiotic economic planning could be implemented. Xinyuan's devilish talent certainly played a role, but the fundamental reason may also be people's enthusiasm for developing the new world and blind worship of technology. In economics, the day the Antarctic Yard project was completed was also the day it died. Although transportation through the Earth tunnel is extremely fast and consumes almost no energy, in the words of people at the time, just throw it down and it will arrive, or just jump down and it will arrive. But due to the huge investment in the project, the transportation cost of the Earth train is extremely expensive, which offsets its advantage of speed and makes the Earth train have no obvious advantage in the competition with traditional transportation methods. You have now risen 3,500 miles from the center of the Earth at a speed of 6.5 kilometers per second and are crossing the Gutenberg discontinuity and re-entering the mantle. The Antarctic dream of mankind was soon shattered. The rush of industry and overdevelopment soon destroyed the only clean world left on Earth, turning the Antarctic continent into a garbage dump filled with smoke and dust like other continents. The ozone layer over Antarctica was completely destroyed, and its impact spread to the whole world. Even in the northern hemisphere, strong ultraviolet rays have made people have to take protection before going out. The accelerated melting of the Antarctic ice sheet has also caused the global sea level to rise sharply. After a painful process, human reason prevailed again, and all member states of the United Nations signed the new Antarctic Convention, which made mankind withdraw completely. Antarctic continent, once again turning Antarctica into a deserted place, hoping that the environment there can slowly recover. With the sudden drop in demand for transportation to Antarctica, after the bolt loss disaster, the geocentric train completely stopped operating, and the Earth tunnel was closed. It has been 8 years now. But the economic disaster brought by the Antarctic Yard project has continued. Countless people who bought Antarctic Yard Company stocks lost all their money, triggering serious social unrest, and the black hole of investment has brought the national economy to the brink of collapse. Now, we are still painfully wandering in the trough of this disaster. Well, this is the story of the Antarctic Yard project. As the speed decreased, the originally stable and smooth blue light on the well wall began to flicker. Gradually, the surrounding well walls could distinguish a single circular aperture passing by. Looking in both directions, the dense concentric circle targets began to appear again. You have now risen 4,800 miles from the center of the Earth at a speed of 5.1 kilometers per second and are passing through the rigid material region of the mantle. What happened to my son later? Shun Huabei asked. After the tunnel was closed, Xinyuan stayed at the Mo starting station as a left-behind person. One day I called him, and he only said one sentence, "I am with my daughter." Later I learned that he had been living an incredible life in the past few years. Every day he wore a sealed suit and fell back and forth in the Earth tunnel, sleeping in it, and only returned to the starting station to eat and recharge the sealed suit. He crossed the Earth about 30 times a day, day after day, year after year, between Mo and the Antarctic Peninsula, doing simple harmonic vibrations with a period of 84 minutes and an amplitude of 12,600 kilometers. You have now risen 6,000 miles from the center of the Earth at a speed of 2.4 kilometers per second and are passing through the viscous material region of the mantle. No one knows what Shin Yuan does in this eternal fall, but according to his colleagues, every time he passes through the center of the Earth, he greets his daughter through the neutrino communication device. He often has long conversations with his daughter while falling. Of course, he is the only one talking, but Shen Jing, who lives in Sunset Number 6 running in the core of the Earth with the iron-nickel flow, should be able to hear it. His body was in a state of weightlessness for a long time, but he had to eat and recharge his airtight suit at the starting station, and he had to endure normal Earth gravity 2 or 3 times a day on the ground. This made his old heart very fragile. He died of a heart attack during a fall, and no one noticed at the time. So his body continued to run in the Earth tunnel for 2 more days. The energy of the airtight suit was exhausted, and the refrigeration stopped. The Earth tunnel became his crematorium, and his body was burned to ashes during the last passage through the center of the Earth. I believe your son is very satisfied with this destination. You have now risen 6,200 kilometers from the center of the Earth at a speed of 1.4 kilometers per second and have passed through the Moho discontinuity and entered the Earth's crust. Attention! You are approaching the south pole of the Earth tunnel. This is also my destination, right? Shin Huabei asked calmly. You should also feel satisfied. Before you die, you have seen what you wanted to see. Originally, we wanted to throw you into the Earth tunnel without wearing a sealed suit, but now you are allowed to wear it and see in its entirety what your son created. Yes, I am very satisfied. This is enough for my life. Thank you all very much. There was no answer. The buzzing sound in the headphones suddenly disappeared, and the Avengers on the other side of the Earth disconnected the communication. Shin Huabei saw that the concentric circles above were already very sparse. It took him 2 or 3 seconds to pass through a circle of light, and the interval was rapidly lengthening. At this time, a beep sounded in the headset, and the mask displayed, "You have reached the south pole of the Earth tunnel." He saw that the center of the concentric circles became empty, and no new light circles emerged. The light circle in the middle became larger and larger. Finally, he passed through the last blue light circle and rose at a not too fast speed towards a small bridge across the wellhead that was exactly the same as the one at the other end of the tunnel. On the bridge stood several people in sealed suits. When he rose out of the wellhead, these people reached out and grabbed him and pulled him onto the bridge. The interior of the Antarctic station was also in darkness, with only the blue light from the aperture on the well wall shining up. He looked up and saw a huge cylinder hanging above him, its diameter slightly smaller than the well mouth. He walked to the well at the end of the small bridge and looked up again. He vaguely saw a row of such cylinders above. He counted 4, and the ones behind were hidden in the darkness above. He knew that this was the suspended geocentric train. 8. Antarctica. Half an hour later, Shan Huabei walked out of the Antarctic tunnel of the Earth with the policeman who saved his life. Station. Standing on the Antarctic plain without snow, you can see the abandoned city in the distance. The sun hanging low on the horizon casts weak rays on this vast and lifeless continent. The air here is better than the other side of the Earth, and there is no need to wear a breathing mask. A police officer told Shan Huabei that they were one of the few police officers left in the Antarctic empty city. After receiving Dr. Guo's call, they immediately rushed to the Antarctic station. The wellhead was sealed at the time. They urgently contacted the Earth Tunnel Management Department to open the well cover. They just saw Shan Huabei rising to the wellhead in the blue light, as if he had emerged from the deep sea. If it was a few seconds later, Shan Huabei would have died. The sealed well cover would have blocked him and caused him to start another fall to the northern hemisphere. Before he passed through the center of the Earth again, the energy of the sealed suit would be exhausted, and he would be reduced to ashes in the furnace of the Earth's core like his son. The guys headed by Ding Yong have been arrested. They will be charged with murder. However, the police officer stared at Shen Huabei coldly and said, I understand their feelings. Shen Huabei was still immersed in the dizziness caused by weightlessness. He looked at the sun in the sky, let out a long breath, and said, My life is enough. If this is the case, you will be more likely to accept your future fate. Another police officer said, Destiny? Shen Huabei came to his senses and turned to look at the police officer. You can't live in this era, otherwise this kind of thing will happen again. Fortunately, the government has a time migration plan. In order to reduce the pressure of population on the environment, a part of the population is forced to hibernate and let them live in the future. Now the government has decided that you will be a member of the time migrants and go back into hibernation. I can't say how long it will take for you to wake up this time. It took Shen Huabei a while to understand what he meant. He bowed deeply to the police officer and said, Thank you. Thank you. How come I am always so lucky? Lucky? The police officer looked at him in confusion. Even the hibernating immigrants of this era can't adapt to life in the future society, let alone someone like you who comes from the past. A smile appeared on Shen Huabei's face. It doesn't matter. The key is that I will see the Earth Tunnel become the pride of mankind again. The police officers laughed a few times. How is that possible? This completely failed mega project will only become a pillar of shame for you and your son forever. Ha ha ha. Shen Huabei laughed out loud. The weakness of weightlessness made him unsteady on his feet, but mentally he was extremely excited. The Great Wall and the pyramids are both completely failed super projects. The former failed to stop the invasion of the northern horse-riding peoples, and the latter failed to resurrect the pharaoh mummies inside. But time has made these irrelevant. Only the human spirit condensed in them will always shine brightly. He pointed to the towering Earth Tunnel Antarctic Station behind him. Compared with this great wall, you crying Ming Jiangnu are so pitiful. Ha ha ha. Shen Huabei opened his arms and let the cold Antarctic wind blow through his body. You honor. This is enough for our life, he said happily. Shen Huabei woke up again half a century later. After waking up, he experienced almost the same things as the last time he woke up 50 years ago. He was taken into a car by a group of strangers, entered the Mo station of the Earth Tunnel, put on a sealed suit. What he couldn't understand was that this sealed suit was much heavier than the one he wore 50 years ago, and was thrown into the Earth Tunnel again to start a long fall. 40 years later, the Earth Tunnel looked unchanged, still a bottomless deep well marked by countless blue light circles. This time, however, he had someone accompanying him as he descended, a beautiful girl who introduced herself as his tour guide. Tour guide? Yes, my hunch was right. The Earth Tunnel really has become the Great Wall and the pyramids, Shen Huabei said excitedly while falling. No, the Earth Tunnel did not become the Great Wall and the pyramids. It became the tour guide girl held Shen Huabei's hand in the weightlessness, carefully keeping pace with him in the fall. What happened? Earth cannon. What? Shen Huabei looked at the well wall flying by in surprise. The tour guide began to recall. After you hibernated, the global environment deteriorated further. Pollution and ozone layer destruction caused the last vegetation on the continents to disappear rapidly. Breathable air has become a commodity. At this time, the only way to save the Earth's ecology is to shut down all human heavy industry and energy industry. That might restore the Earth's ecology, but it would destroy human civilization, Shen Huabei interrupted. Faced with the tragic situation at the time, many people were willing to make this choice. However, more people were looking for other ways out. The most feasible way was to transfer all industries on Earth to space and the moon. So, you built a space elevator? No, I tried it and found it's harder than digging a tunnel in the Earth. So, invented the anti-gravity spacecraft? Not even close, but it has been theoretically proven that it is impossible. Nuclear rocket? Yes, but the transportation cost is comparable to that of conventional rockets. If these means are used to transfer industry to space, an economic disaster similar to that of the Earth Tunnel will occur again. Then you can't transfer anything. So, Shen Huabei grinned bitterly. It's the post-human era up there? The tour guide did not answer. The two continued to fall into the bottomless abyss in silence. The rings of light passing by became denser and denser, and finally the wall of the well became a smooth hole emitting blue light. After another 10 minutes, the blue light turned red. They silently passed through the center of the earth at a speed of 8 kilometers per second. The wall of the well soon emitted blue light again. The tour guide girl deftly turned her body 180 degrees and turned into an upward posture with her head facing up. Xinhuabei also clumsily followed suit. Oh, Xinhuabei suddenly screamed. From the display in the upper right corner of the mask, he saw that their current speed was 8.5 kilometers per second. After passing the center of the earth, they were still accelerating. Another thing that terrified Xinhuabei was that he felt gravity. During this fall through the earth, he should have been weightless from beginning to end, but he really felt gravity. The scientist's intuition quickly told him that this was not gravity, but thrust, and it was this thrust that enabled them to overcome the growing gravity of the Earth and maintain acceleration. You must remember Jules Verne's moon cannon, right? The tour guide suddenly asked. The stupidest book I ever read as a child. Xinhuabei answered absent-mindedly, looking around, trying to make sense of this strange thing that had suddenly appeared. It's not stupid at all. Using a cannon to launch is the most ideal and fastest way for humans to enter space on a large scale. Unless you want to be crushed to a pulp in a cannonball. It was crushed into a pulp because of too great an acceleration, and that acceleration was too great because the barrel was too short. If the barrel was long enough, the Shek could be shot out with a gentle acceleration, just like what you are feeling now. So we are in the Verne cannon? I told you it's called the Earth cannon. Xinhuabei looked up at the tunnel emitting blue light, trying to imagine it as a gun barrel. Due to the high speed, the wall of the tunnel looked integrated, without any sense of movement. They seemed to be suspended motionlessly in this giant tube emitting blue light. 4 years after your hibernation, we developed a new type of solid material. In addition to the properties of previous materials of this type, it is also an excellent conductor. Now, a thick wire made of this material is wrapped around the outer surface of this half of the Earth tunnel, turning this half of the Earth tunnel into an electromagnetic coil that is 6,300 kilometers long. Where does the current in the coil come from? There are powerful and abundant electric currents in the Earth's core, and it is these currents that generate the Earth's magnetic field. We use the core ship to tow the new solid-state wire and pull hundreds of large loops in the Earth's core. Each loop is thousands of kilometers long. We use these loops to collect the currents in the Earth's core and converge them on the tunnel coils, filling the tunnel with a strong magnetic field. Our sealed suits have 2 superconducting coils on the shoulders and waist. The currents in the coils generate magnetic fields in opposite directions, and this is how thrust is generated. As the acceleration continued, the ascending section was about to be completed, and the well wall emitted red light again. Attention! Our speed has reached 15 kilometers per second, exceeding the second cosmic speed, and we are about to fly out of the muzzle. At this time, at the South Pole exit of the Earth tunnel, the tall building where the Earth Center train was parked had long been demolished, and the circular exit of the Earth tunnel directly faced the sky with a sealed cover. The following voice came from the loudspeaker. Attention, visitors, the Earth cannon will launch its 43rd launch today. Please wear goggles and earplugs, otherwise your vision and hearing will be permanently damaged. 10 seconds later, the sealing cover of the tunnel slid aside, revealing a circular wellhead with a diameter of 10 meters. Air rushed into the vacuum well, making a sharp whistling sound. With a loud bang, a long tongue of fire spurted out of the wellhead. Its brightness eclipsed the low-hanging sun in the Antarctic sky. The sealing cover quickly slid back to cover the wellhead, and the vacuum pump in the well made a low roar, jerking out the air that had entered the well in the 3 seconds when the cover was opened just now, in preparation for the next launch. People looked up and saw 2 meteors with fire tails rising rapidly, and soon disappeared in the deep blue sky of Antarctica. Xinhuabei did not see the tunnel exit coming towards him as he had imagined. The speed was too fast for him to see clearly. He only saw that the red tunnel he was in, which seemed to lead to infinite heights, disappeared in an instant and was replaced by the blue sky of Antarctica. There was no transition between the two, as fast as the switching of 2 images on the screen. He turned his head suddenly and saw that the ground beneath his feet was rapidly receding. He recognized the Antarctic city, which soon turned into a rectangular area the size of a basketball court. Looking up, he saw that the color of the sky was rapidly changing from blue to black, as fast as a screen being dimmed. Looking down again, he saw the narrow and curved shape of the Antarctic Peninsula and the sea surrounding the peninsula. There was a long tail of fire behind him. Looking at his body, he found that the surface of the airtight suit was burning. He was wrapped in a thin layer of flames. Looking at the guide who was rising with him more than 10 meters away from him, he was also wrapped in flames, like a small monster with a long tail of fire. The huge air resistance was like a giant palm pressing hard on his head and shoulders, but as the sky darkened, the giant palm seemed to be conquered by another more powerful force, and its pressure gradually relaxed. Looking down, the Antarctic continent had shown its complete shape, and Shen Huabei was surprised to find that the continent had returned to its white color. Looking far away, the Earth has shown an arc shape, and the sun is moving up from the edge of the Earth, scattering brilliant rays of light in the thin atmosphere. Looking up again, the stars have appeared in the space. It is the first time that Shen Huabei has seen such bright and glittering stars. The flames on their bodies have gone out, and they have rushed out of the atmosphere and are floating in the silent space. Shen Huabei felt as light as a swallow. He found that the sealed suit on his body, the space suit, had become much thinner. The heat dissipation material on the surface had evaporated in the intense friction with the atmosphere. At this time, the communication blind spot when passing through the atmosphere at high speed had passed, and the voice of the tour guide sounded in his headphones. The resistance when passing through the atmosphere consumed part of the speed, but our current speed is still higher than the escape value. We are flying away from the Earth. Look there, the tour guide pointed to the Antarctic Peninsula, which had become very small below. Shen Huabei saw a flash of light at the exit of the Earth tunnel. Then a meteor with a tail of fire slowly rose from the peninsula. After flying out of the atmosphere, the fire went out. That's a spaceship that the Earth cannon just launched. It will take us back. There are 5 or 6 cannonballs running in the barrel of the Earth cannon at all times, so it can launch a spaceship every 8 to 10 minutes. So now entering space is as convenient as taking the subway. 20 years ago, when the Great Industrial Migration began, it was the most frequent period of launch. There were often more than 20 cannonballs accelerating in the barrel at the same time. The Earth cannon fired rapidly into space at a frequency of 1 shot every 2 or 3 minutes. Batches of spaceships formed an ascending meteor shower. It was a solemn challenge of mankind to fate. It was really spectacular. At this time, Shen Huabei found many fast-moving stars among the stars. Their movement was easy to see against the still starry sky background. Those objects must be in the Earth's orbit. Looking more closely, a considerable number of them can be seen in shape. Some are ring-shaped, some are cylindrical, and some are irregular bodies composed of multiple shapes, like exquisite small ornaments in the dark space. That's Baoshan Iron and Steel Company, the guide said, pointing to a glowing ring, and then pointed to several other bright spots in turn. Those are Sinopec. Of course, they don't process oil now. Those cylindrical ones are the European Metallurgical Consortium. Those are solar power stations that use microwaves to supply electricity to the Earth. The ones that glow are only their control centers. The solar cell arrays and antenna arrays that transmit electricity are invisible. Shen Huabei was intoxicated by the scene, and looking at the blue Earth below, his tears welled up. His greatest wish now was to let everyone who had participated in the Antarctic Garden Project, both dead and alive, look at these. He thought of one of them in particular, a woman who would always be young in everyone's mind. "Have you found my granddaughter?" he asked. "No, we lack the technology to conduct long-distance detection in the Earth's core. It is a vast area, and no one knows where the iron-nickel flow has taken her. Can we use neutrinos to send what we see to the center of the Earth? I've been doing this. I believe she will see it."